I know that you really kind of like honed your craft a bit when you went out to Iceland
Yes.
and you trained with a lot of preeminent kind of composers out there. What
Well,
How
that well.
did that take you, Ben?
uh, yeah, so that was a good one. So by that point, I kind of already started. I was really interested in electronic music as well. By that point, so I was maybe early 20s, I think. Really interested in lots of different types of music, but really like things like Björk and Sigur Rós in particular. That was a time where they weren't really that well known at all, and Iceland wasn't a really well known destination. People, when I was saying I was going there, people were like, "You're going where? Why? What the hell is that all about?" So that was quite thrilling as well.
How did you find out about Iceland, or why did that pique your interest?
Well, I remember
Fans.
particularly Sigur Rós saying like that, like the landscape of Iceland was an inspiring thing to them writing music. And I think probably at the time that was partly true and partly kind of marketing bullshit, because it's quite a cool thing to say. And no one was really talking about things like that at the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that sounds interesting. So I did a bit of reading about the place. It sounded interesting. And then I had the opportunity through a kind of European Union voluntary scheme to go, which was great. So I just sort of went for it and it was great. So yeah, by that point, I was like recording a lot of music myself, or trying to figure out how to make this kind of weird hybrid music, like trying to make music on your own. Because I'd never really been in a band either, and I didn't really understand what it was like to make music with other people.
Did you find that kind of like expanded your horizons, like what you were doing musically?
Being in Iceland definitely did, because doing it in Britain, it was a very isolating experience. You felt like almost nobody understood what the hell you were doing and why you're doing it and why you're even interested in all this type of stuff. So it was quite an isolating thing. And then going there was kind of the opposite. It's like a really small, tight knit place full of like really highly creative people, and there was a lot of interest in a lot of the things I was interested in. So that was a real eye opener of like, well, hey, there's people interested in what you're doing who appreciate it and think it's actually quite good. And B, it was a great experience to learn. And I was surrounded by, loads of really interested, talented people in all sorts of disciplines. And yeah.
I know you've done installations at Burning Man. You've done a lot of work with museum pieces actually, and you've done short films, and I think this was your first feature, wasn't it? On the line.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
So you kind of got a multi kind of disciplinary kind of like talent and interest there. And how do you find like crossing over between all of those, disciplines? Does it come naturally to you?
Yeah, perfectly natural, to be honest. I mean, I think my interest in music and sound is kind of parallel. Like, I don't really see the difference between one another. Like, and like, I didn't go to school to study music, like I've kind of found my own way through it. And again, it's probably sound a bit weird, but kind of one of my formative sound experiences, they would be like, watching Star Wars, because it's a great exercise of how sound creates a world and how it's so resonant and powerful. If you ever watch Star Wars with the sound off, you'll find it's pretty crap. And so anyway, yeah, really interested in
on The Office and what
yeah,
things
exactly.
like, you just need it.
So yeah, I've always been really interested in like the sonic qualities of things, and I was always one of these like weirdos as a kid, like just interested in weird sounds, or like you find yourself putting your ear to something because it does something, and people making fun of you because you're like interested in weird noises. So all that stuff I think is kind of, it's just a parallel thing. Like, I think there's really a great difference between an interesting like sound in the world and an interesting piece of music, as long as it has some sort of resonance or pricks up your ears. I think that's kind of what it's about. So yeah, I don't see a great difference between doing like installation work or film work or straight up music or like pure sound design. I think it's all similar, really.
I mean, I'm going to go back to when I reached out to you. I think it was literally the first day of the year. I think it was Monday, the
It was
January.
New Year's Day.
New Year's Day. Maybe
That
this is
was
the
a good
first.
start to the
Yeah.
year. Yeah.
I found, I went on SoundCloud, and I pulled together about 40 or 50 different songs, kind of favorited them all. And then, because I had a very temporary track, rough cut of the film, and I just started putting music randomly to it. And I didn't know who composed any of the tracks or what any of them were called, but I'd saved that information somewhere else. And I went back to it and I realized, 9 out of 10 of the tracks I'd actually used were yours. which was pretty good.
That's amazing.
And then the one or two that weren't, I went back through your kind of work and was like, oh, okay, yeah, I kind of actually, that one does work there as well. So I managed to make a complete kind of demo with music that you'd done. And then I'm not sure I ever showed you it because I didn't want it to influence you. But I definitely remember that there were one or two tracks. Actually, no, I did. I showed it to you. I think I did show it to you. You're like, oh yeah, some of these really work. And I know that you remixed some of those tracks, or some of those weren't appropriate. We came up with better movements for it. But I know in the undertow and some of those tracks that they stayed firmly there. And I think what I loved about it was you brought the whole environment into the room. And definitely the machines is a huge theme of your work. And was probably one of the things that grabbed you. But what were those things that really grabbed you? And how surprised were you to get the call?
Yeah, I was surprised. It was, it doesn't happen that often really in the creative world. Completely a complete random person contacts you and says, hey, I really like what you do you want to work together? People like to think it happens all the time, but it really doesn't. It's usually through connections with one another. So that was very thrilling. And it was very flattering actually when you're saying that again, like this random connection of like you'd come across the music and really enjoyed it in the film's sort of formative edits, which was amazing. And I don't think I, really realized actually that you'd used so much of it that early. And some, like I say, some of it I think made it all the way through to the actual final mix, actually. Like those placements of particular pieces that have already been written that worked really, really, really well in the film. But I would say that, probably 90% of it was bespoke. But there were definitely these little kernels that already just worked like straight off the bat, which was pretty extraordinary.
How many people were involved in your team? I know. Well, okay, I jumped the gun. I know it's just you, but how do you collaborate with other people? Did you collaborate with anyone on this?
Yes, I did. I collaborated with a vocalist, singer, Esther Swift, who I've actually worked with many times over the years. She's an incredible harpist as well. So actually, the last record I released, she played a lot of harp on, and we worked together for a long time. So that was a piece I'd written, and I think you were saying how this could really benefit from an actual, a singer. I think at the time I was actually really pleased with what I'd done. I was like, my favorite thing on the film, and I was like, fuck's sake, he wants me to change it. And I was like, oh, fine, okay, then I'll find a vocalist. And I gave Esther a call, and she's up for it, as she usually is. But that was, so my collaboration with her was interesting because I didn't really know what exactly I wanted to do, and I hadn't like scored out vocal parts. So a lot of the time when I work with collaborators, I just do sessions where we kind of just like muck about or just record lots of pieces, and I start piecing them together. And then when we have some sort of direction, we can kind of continue. But it's not like I score something and then they do it. It's very much a kind of giant collage that comes together. And even after the sessions, I then go and collage it again. So it's a great big sort of jumble of ideas, but I'm usually managed to direct it into something that seems coherent and seems to work. But collage is kind of the closest thing I can think of to trying to explain some of those collaborations.
How long do the sessions go on for? Are they an hour or two, or because it doesn't take long probably to get?
Usually a couple of hours. I don't really like doing longer sessions than that. I think it's kind of hard to maintain the intensity. So not too long, but then much longer afterwards, just sort of trying to piece everything together into something actually meaningful. But that's the way I kind of like to work a lot of the time. It's either through improvisation or recording lots and lots of bits and then trying to put them together again. And they often do, and do interesting and unexpected things.
I think I remember that was kind of one of the last things we put together. But did you kind of like how did you kind of approach kind of maybe the longer sections of the film? Or because I know that there's one kind of 10-minute shot, and that obviously requires something pretty bespoke and pretty new.
Dolly shot that's 10 minutes long. I mean, I really love that bit. That was one of my favorite pieces to write, or sections to write for. And in the actual edit itself, it already seemed to work really, really well. And it was just, to be honest, just like improvising through a lot of it. I think I probably did 2 or 3 sort of passes of like just improvising to the film with various sort of virtual instruments or real instruments, and then taking those and taking the best bits from each other and piecing it together into something coherent. But a lot of it was just improvising to the film, and a lot of that worked actually much more successfully than I would expected. But I think that it's to the strength of the film, and the tension in those scenes was just great to sort of flesh out. It was almost like flexing your tension talons, so to speak, like when given the like having the opportunity to do that as well. So that was a great thing. But a lot of it was sort of like started out as improvised, just playing directly to the film.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the opening shot? Because I know that we use the rhythm, the punctuation of the machines. They kind of take on like a heartbeat, and kind of the room feels alive. I always like to think of it in that moment. We see the machines, they're working, they're their own entity. She's kind of swallowed up in this body. It's very claustrophobic and the pressure cooker. But yeah, how did you kind of like interweave the machines and the room and the environment into the score? How did you do that?
Yeah, so I think Christian, the sound designer on the project, had gone back to either was it the same place where you shot it, or as a museum of similar types of.
Yeah, it's exactly the same place.
It was the same place. Yeah.
Yeah, we went back with all sorts of instruments, electricity, sensors, and we picked up lots of amazing sounds there.
You did, yeah, and it was great to get the recordings from that session, just purely like here is the machines and the things they can do, mic'd up and in loads of ways that Christian did an amazing job with. And a lot of that, again, it's sort of back to what I was saying about like sound. Like I found that also just really interesting and compelling, and like there were a lot of even the non-mechanical, like not the mechanical things of the machines, like a lot of that electromagnetic stuff that you captured was also weaved in like later in the score as well. Some of it's quite subtle in the mix, but it's like this kind of tense, noisy thing that I just found a really interesting and exciting noise. So we wove that into the score. But the first section, we kind of felt like we wanted something that had a kind of pulse, that had something percussive, that had some sort of like motion to it to start off the film. And she's doing this kind of routine through that scene as well. So it felt like it needed something rhythmic. I think that was your direction. And to be honest, it was the hardest thing in the whole film to write, to make it work, to like get the tempo and the feel right, and for it actually to work. And there were times where I was, convinced that it wasn't going to work, but it did get it to work in the end. And a lot of it is from those sort of pulses and the rhythms of the actual machines that are then featured in the film. And this, part of the protagonist's actions, which was great. And that was also exciting to have that sort of limitation and that like palette to work with.
Yeah. What kind of range of instruments were you using?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big range. There's everything from strings, woodwinds, a lot of fairly traditional instrumentation, and we use that because the film's set in the 60s. We wanted to have a kind of classic feel, so it made sense to use like classic instrumentation that you would have you've heard in film scores for forever, to give it a very classic film scorey type sound. But also you were also kind of adamant, and I was as well, to use electronic parts. So there's a lot of real like contemporary sort of bass stuff in there. There's a lot of noise processing and things. There's also the sound of those machines. There's piano as well, and like extended technique of piano and all sorts of stuff. And also just processing stuff to just get like textures as well, like that you kind of marry together. You find a way.
I can't begin to think how many layers of track there were on some of them, because there's some very complex tracks on there.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and some of it's like quite unusual as well. Like, so there's one scene probably about halfway through the film where there's kind of like a kind of pulsing thing, but it's pulsing of like the strings, and that's using this technique called sidechain compression. People use a lot in dance music, but it's like taking like strings and like kind of hammering them so they kind of duck out of the way. So you get this kind of like pulsing, but you get the pulsing by like essentially trying to punch a hole in something else, which is an aesthetic I find quite interesting. And yeah, using that as a technique to make a kind of string orchestra piece of music, which is quite unusual. But it seemed to sort of convey the kind of rising tension and the ebbing and flowing of what was happening. That was a really fun one to use.
Yeah, it has to be heard to be believed. I mean, when you hear it in the cinema and you got it on 7.1 and it's just amazing. You want to be sitting right at the front next to the speakers. And yeah, it's wicked.
Number 1034, Golf Club.
I can't transfer you right now.
What?
Please call back later.
If you don't mind, how am I meant to speak to the club?
Not now.
I need to book a round of golf.
Arrive early. I'm expecting a call from someone in need.
Listen, I've never seen such inefficient, miserable service in my life.
1089, please, Agnes.
Operator, the vet. Operator, I've been waiting for about 50...
I wonder what's next for you? Is there any album? Are you going to release any music coming up soon?
Yeah, possibly.
What?
I mean, there's actually a lot of music that I've made for the film that we used and didn't use, and also there's a couple of sort of theatre and dance pieces I've done over the last few years that I really liked a lot of the music for, and I have been sort of putting together a collection of those things, which I think work really nicely as an actual listening experience. So that may well be a record. I think it's a very awkward time to make records and release them and get people's attention and get people to digest them any way you want to. I think that's kind of a bit of a blocker for me personally. It's sort of like, well, do I really want to throw out more noise into this ocean of noise, or do I want to, I don't know, find some other way to do that? Not really sure what the answer to that question is, but there is plenty of stuff that I like and I've been making. Whether it finds its way out into the world in a normal record format, I think is another question.
Yeah, so yeah, I get that as well. I'm kind of exploring kind of different ways of reaching audiences, and it just seems like there's so much noise, as you say, out there. Even with On the Line, I mean, it's still a fight to kind of fight for everybody's attention. And it is a complete experience. So you've got the sound, but that's only an element of it. You've got the acting, you've got the directing, the framing, the cinematography, the light. It is a complete whole, and holistically, it really works as a thing. And the music pulls that all together, which is fantastic. And even bits like, I might say that I would like to again, but the music makes it work, so that's fine. So you got my back definitely in one or two moments, but I won't point those out. And yeah, thank you so much just for chatting it through with me. And I know it's been a little while since we did it. We scored the film, and it was great to kind of do that final mix up in Edinburgh, and have you there for that, just so we could get it exactly how it was intended. So yeah, thanks for joining me all
thank you
along the way.
It's a real pleasure. Yeah, and I think it was relatively, compared to many other projects I've done, relatively easy for me, really, in a lot of ways. Like, all things considered, I think that was a credit to the film, the atmosphere of the film, and and what I got to write to, and it's at the very last stage of it, really. So yeah, there was so much to play off that it was a great experience to do. So yeah, thank you.